Thank you all for coming. We have Stanley to my right who will be joining us shortly. He's going to give a quick talk about kind of doing things that don't scale, and then from there we'll make it pretty interactive, and we'll have a bunch of time for questions. Stanley and I met a very long time ago. I think I was a senior in high school. Stanley was a freshman here, and through an event very similar to this that Stanley attended, he was a part of Bases here, graduated 9 years ago?
Yeah,
2014. And so I'm super excited that he is spending time with all of us. I think everyone knows what DoorDash is, and everyone knows who Stanley is. So with that, Stanley, thank you for spending time with all of us.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I mean, it's good to be back here on campus. As Corey mentioned, I was here from 2010 to 2014, and I was actually in my junior year when I started DoorDash right down the street, and it's just been an incredible journey. And I was asked to come in and share kind of our founding story, of how we started from kind of our dorm room project to where it is today. But first, I actually wanted to share with you the story of a slightly different company that instead of DoorDash. So 10 years ago, there was also a food delivery service that was launched on campus. Also started in a dorm room, and that company was called Palo Alto Delivery. And I want to share with you that story first, and hopefully kind of highlight kind of the entrepreneurship journey of how we eventually got to DoorDash. So the story began actually in the fall of 2012. So I met actually it was through one of the classes here at Stanford. It was called Startup Garage, where I actually met my future co-founder. Andy and Tony. And at the time, we actually weren't really looking to do a startup. Actually, we weren't even looking even in a project in the food delivery space. I think the three of us, we were actually exploring a very different idea around for a class project around building software for small business. So at the time, Tony just wrapped up his internship at Square, so he had a lot of experience building software for small business. I've been, my family's been involved with small business. I've built a lot of software for them, and this was just a space we were really interested in. We felt not a lot of people were focused in this area, and we thought, there was a lot of opportunity around, what are some ways we can bring technology into the space, but we had no idea what we wanted to do, but we knew that was kind of the general direction. So what we started to do was we just started to talk to people. We started talking to, if we were going to build software for small businesses, who better to talk to than the business owners themselves. So I remember every day after class, we would literally just start walking down University Avenue in Palo Alto, California Ave, and we just started going door to door, spoke to anyone who was willing to talk to us. Everybody from, obviously there were restaurants, but it was flower stores, shoe stores, local boutique retailers, you name it. And really, we just wanted to we just wanted to understand what was it like to use, what are some of the challenges they were facing on a day-to-day basis. And I remember one day we must have spoken to hundreds or 200 hundreds of businesses in the area. And I remember one day we actually walked into this macaroon store in Palo Alto. It's on University Avenue. I think it's still there. It's called Chantal Guillaume. And I remember we walked in. The person who greeted us, her name was Chloe, who was the store manager at the time. We started talking to her, started asking her questions about her macaroon business. And I remember we sat down in the middle of our conversation, she had to go take a phone call. She came back and she brought this really thick booklet with her, started writing some stuff down, And I started asking her, so what is this booklet? What was that phone call? And she said, oh, that was actually someone calling in because they wanted delivery for my macaroons, and wanted to see if we can offer that. And I asked, but unfortunately, like I can't do this delivery. I'm like fully booked out. They want it tomorrow, so it just didn't work out. And I started asking her, so how often does this happen? And she said, oh, all the time. And that was when she started showing me what this booklet was about. It's basically her order, or I guess bookkeeping, right? Like a booklet of all the orders she was getting, she had for that month. A lot of it were delivery requests. And as he started showing me all these delivery requests, I started noticing like a lot of them actually end up getting canceled. Right? Like it's and I asked her, like, what's going on here? Like, it seems like you're getting a lot of delivery requests, but you're not fulfilling these orders. Like, what's going on? And that was, it doesn't seem normal for these stores to turn away business. And that was kind of when she started, unveiling kind of this world of delivery and how it's been such a big challenge for her. And in fact, she actually wants to fulfill all these deliveries, but she just doesn't have any options. Because if you think about it, like if you're, as a macaroon store owner, she said, when it comes to delivery, there's basically one of two options. One, I can do it myself, which is actually what ends up happening. But the problem is every time she does it herself, like that's time away from the store. So unless it's a really large corporate order or office order that she can't refuse, most of the time she just declines it. And then the other option is, she can use one of these local courier services, right? Like so there's it's kind of you could think of it as like the local version of FedEx, except these courier services weren't really designed to deliver macaroons. They're really meant more for like high value documents. Typically they're very, very expensive. Very old school businesses that have been around for 40, 50 years. Not a lot of technology involved. And as a result, it really only makes sense. They typically charge $50 to $100 just to do a 3-mile delivery, which obviously doesn't make sense if it's just a $20 macaroon order. So typically, it's only for legal documents or medical supplies, things like that end up being the use case. So again, unless it's like a really large order, she was, and she was busy. That was the only time she would resort to using one of these courier services, and that was like a really interesting insight for us. It's like, it seems like you're getting all these delivery requests from customers, but there weren't any, but you have to turn away most of them because there weren't any good solutions. Like, this seems like there's something here. And we started talking to more business owners, and we kind of heard the same thing from a bunch of other folks. We heard the same thing from a coffee shop in San Mateo. I remember hearing the same thing. A flower store on Cal Ave. Furniture shops, and of course restaurants. And we kept hearing the same thing over and over again. All these businesses see delivery as this amazing way to grow their volume, grow their business, so to speak. But there weren't any good solutions. And that was kind of when we realized, like, maybe there's something here. Like, maybe instead of just building them a piece of software, like, what if we built a software? What if we took the same software and technology and applied it to building a delivery service that can power all these businesses? Like, maybe that is what businesses. Maybe that's what these local businesses actually need. And so we went back, and I remember going back to we sort of huddled and said, I think there's something here, except there's one problem. We don't have a delivery service. We're just 3 college students. It's not like we have trucks flying around and this delivery infrastructure. and we didn't even have the technology. But we certainly didn't have not the technology built. So how can we offer this to these businesses when we don't even have a delivery service ourselves? Right? So what we did was, instead of trying to think of this as, okay, we got to spend like 6 months, 12 months building this whole infrastructure out, then try to pitch this to businesses and small businesses and restaurants and the macaroon stores, so forth, on this idea. What if we ran an experiment instead? And the experiment we wanted to validate was, is there consumer demand for delivery? Maybe it turns out none of these delivery services exist because it's such a niche thing. Like none of these, maybe customers don't actually want delivery. How can we validate that? And we thought, okay, well, what if we can validate this by just building a landing page? And all this landing page said was, if you're interested in ordering delivery from these places, call this phone number. And the idea behind this landing page was basically to see if people landed on this website, will they call this phone number? And if we got enough people calling in to this phone number, then maybe we can go back to the restaurants or the businesses and kind of see if we can start some sort of some sort of deal. So we decided to start with the landing. Okay, let's start with the landing page. We picked restaurants to begin with because we thought, okay, what's the most obvious thing to deliver? It's that people would use frequently. It's food. Most places in Palo Alto, at least back then, did not offer delivery. So we thought, okay, why don't we go find our 10 favorite restaurants in Palo Alto that don't offer delivery. We'll go find their menus online. We'll put it into these PDFs, put it on this website, and basically they wrote, if you want to order delivery from these 10 restaurants, call this number. And it was basically a Google Voice number that ran all 3 of our cell phones. And the idea is, again, it's like, we'll call in, see how many phone calls we'll get, and if we have enough phone calls, then we can say, hey, this is a success. And honestly, there wasn't any plan beyond that. It was really just to collect data, and we spent an afternoon. I remember in one of the classrooms here. It took us maybe like an hour to make this website. It was probably one of the ugliest websites I've ever made in my life, and all this, and just to kind of show how little thought we put into it. We didn't even bother coming up with a name. It's like, okay, what's the name for this? Well, why don't we just call it paloaltodelivery.com, right? And it happened to be available, so we registered it. We put this website out there, and kind of went back to our dorm rooms. Honestly, we kind of forgot about it. It was a Saturday. We kind of went back, and then I remember an hour and a half in, our phone rang. We picked up, and somehow this person called and said, hey, this is Palo Alto Delivery. Somehow this person found out about this, no idea how, because we haven't told anyone about it. So, and I remember exactly the exact conversation. He called in and said, hey, is this Palo Alto Delivery? I saw your website, I'm hungry, I want to order Thai food from this place called Bangkok Cuisine. I remember his exact order. He wanted shrimp pad thai with egg rolls, and he said, "Can you deliver it for me?" And originally, the plan was, like I said, to kind of tell them, "Oh, this is not a real delivery service. This is just a Stanford class project. We're just gathering data." But it seemed like this person was really, really hungry, and no one really had the guts to say, "Oh, I certainly wasn't the one that's going to tell them, hey, this is not a real service," and neither did my 2 co-founders. So we decided, you know what? It's just one delivery. We don't have anything better to do. We're just doing our homework. But why don't we just we can just go do it ourselves, right? Like we can just place an order with the restaurant, pretend it's like a takeout order, get in our cars and just go do the delivery. You know, I remember Tony again. He just finished his internship at Square. He had tons of these you know, these Square readers lying around where you can just like, and he had a Square account, so we can just easily charge. You know, he just have him swipe the credit card and charge for the order. So we thought, okay, why don't we just go do this order? And so we got in our cars, drove to Bangkok Cuisine, picked up the food, and drove it up on, I think he lived on Alpine Road. We drove up there, and that was our first ever order. This was January 12th, 2013. And the crazy thing started, well, what was crazy was the next day, you know, we got 2 phone calls. So they picked up, okay, it's just 2 phone calls, two orders. Why don't we go do it ourselves? Place the takeout order, got in our cars. And then the day after that, it became 3, and then 5, and then 10, and then 15. And the next thing you knew, like our phones were just blowing up left and right. And again, like none of this we were expecting, right? Like this was just meant to be a data collection exercise. But as the phone started ringing, we kind of just went with the flow, and we kind of figured things out on the fly. Right? So you know, I remember like we would you know, we'll be sitting in class, our phones will be ringing. We have to get out of class, you know, and drive to restaurant. And then we started figuring out, okay, like one of us needs to be like the dispatcher, you know, so we started having a schedule on like who's going to take calls and who's going to drive. And then we started recruiting our friends to start driving for us. And in order to coordinate everything, we had everyone download, you know, Find My Friends on their iPhone. So then we kind of see everyone's location, and everything was manual, like zero software. Right? It was Google Voice, Find My Friends, Square to kind of take the payment, Google Sheets to kind of track all the orders, and we kind of figured things out as we went, and it was kind of this idea, and that was kind of really the big learning we had was really this idea of what one of our mentors, Paul Graham in YC, taught us, which is this idea of doing things that don't scale. Like, don't try to think about building everything out first and then launch. Instead, try to do everything manually first. Hack together things, because chances are you're not going to know what you need to build unless you do it first. Right? And like we had no idea how to take orders through and place the restaurants. We had no idea how to do dispatch or figure out how to coordinate all these drivers and things like that. Like, and how when to send the driver to the restaurant. You know, you got to time it when the food's ready. Like, where are the different parking spots? How do you deal with different cuisines? And all these things we only knew because we were the ones doing it, and we were doing everything manually. And then only once we started figuring out how to actually do it and make it work, then we built the product to automate it. So everything was extremely manual to begin with. Even the name we didn't even come up was kind of a quote unquote unscalable name. I'll kind of give you 3 examples of doing things that don't scale. So the first thing was, one of the things we started running into was, how do you actually, so in the beginning, when we were the ones placing the takeout order, we would show up at the restaurant, we would just use our own credit card and pay for the food, and knowing that the customer we're going to charge the customer later through Square. But once we started recruiting people that weren't us delivering the food, like we can't just expect these college students to put everything on their credit card, and then we'll pay them a week later. So what was kind of the solution? So something we realized was, okay, what if we instead of what if we just gave them credit cards instead, right? But not our credit cards, but we can actually go to Walgreens and CVS and buy, I guess technically they're not credit cards, but buy these kind of debit cards, these prepaid. You can kind of buy these debit cards. I don't know if it's called debit cards, but these prepaid cards where you essentially load them up with money, $1,000, $2,000, and then we'll just hand it out to our drivers. And that ended up being the way, in the early days, before we had integrations with all these restaurants, the driver will show up with one of these prepaid cards and actually pay for the food then. Eventually we automated it, right? Like now, we have, integrations in place with restaurants, we do kind of ACH payment, but in the early days, it's like, instead of waiting to build all that out, we can just go to Walgreens and buy a bunch of these prepaid cards and just give it to our drivers. So then they can just start driving tomorrow, right? And from all these, before we even had these integrations. So that's what we did, like every night. So you actually can't buy these cards with another credit card. You actually have to show up with cash. So literally, like every day, we actually would go to our bank account, withdraw like thousands of dollars in cash, show up in CVS, and just buy a bunch of these cards. And you can imagine, and we're doing this every day, I'm sure it didn't look sketchy at all to see the same group of college students come in with cash and just buying boatloads of prepaid cards every single day. But that's what we did, and that's how we learned how kind of payments worked. The second story is I remember this was a couple months into our launch. And I remember, at that point, the website was a little bit more built out. We had all the payments were done through the website, but everything was still hard coded. So essentially it was just a form with a credit card link. And then once the order came in, everything behind the scenes we were still manually processing it. And it was a hard coded, we just told everyone, hey, the order is 45-minute delivery. It was everything was just hard coded. And I remember this was right after when school reopened in the fall. It was the first Stanford home football game of the year, and it was pouring rain that day. And for those of you who don't know, when the weather is raining, when the weather is bad, that's when delivery volume spikes. And that was the first time where our delivery volume just kind of spiked through the roof. And I think we were just completely unprepared. We were used to doing maybe at the time like 100 orders, 80 to 100 orders a day. I think that day must have been 300, 400, 500 orders worth of volume. We didn't have the drivers in the system, enough drivers on the road to kind of handle everything. And the problem was because everything was hard coded, we couldn't stop the orders from coming in. So the orders kept coming in, and there was actually no way of shutting down the site or killing the site because we haven't built that. Because that's never happened before. So, and it just, and I remember we had these roles where like one person, a couple people would be kind of at, quote unquote, like HQ, which was basically a house that we rented down the street. And it's, they're supposed to be manning the phones, handling all the dispatch, but because we were so short staffed, like I remember at one point, there was literally nobody in the house. Like everyone was out doing deliveries. We were completely crushed. And that night it just ended up, being a huge disaster. I remember like almost every single order was late by, 2 or 3 hours. And finally, once everything kind of, wrapped up, we kind of gathered and we kind of reflected like what just happened, right? I think, and again, there's two kind of things we ended up doing. I think first is, we realized we have to build a kill switch, and we had to have dynamic ETAs and pricing based on how much demand you're getting. We would not have known that if we if we didn't experience it ourselves. And then I think the second thing is we decided, okay, we're actually going to write handwritten cards to every single person whose order was late by over an hour, and then we also baked cookies ourselves that night, and we actually went and door to door to every single one of our customer, and and apologized for our order being late, with a handwritten card, with cookies and chocolates, and we also decided to refund everyone's order, for those who were impacted, everyone's order that night, and it was, and that was a substantial, it was a pretty pivotal moment because it was. It was actually a pretty substantial part of our bank account. It was about, probably like 30-40% what we raised from our YC money. But we decided, hey, this was the right thing to do, and we were just going to go door to door and do this, one-on-one, and it wasn't like a financial thing that we weren't like thinking about like ROI or is this worth it. We just did it because we thought that was the right thing to do, and again, that is something that only like a big company can't pull off. It's only a startup that can pull this off, because they are allowed to do things that don't scale, and that eventually, this idea of customer love became ingrained in kind of the DoorDash culture. Because that was, and because of that incident. So the last story, last example I want to share of doing things that don't scale is this product or this project we worked on, where. So in the beginning, the way, I don't know if folks know, but in the beginning, again, we hacked everything together. Like the way we would place an order with a restaurant it was literally one of us just making a phone call, pretending to place a takeout order. And again, like we're taught to do things that don't scale. And we thought, okay, like we'll just do this we'll just do this for now. I'm sure down the road we would figure out how to integrate with them. Eventually we'll give them iPads or integrate into their point of sale or whatever it might be. But for now, we'll just place phone calls. That should work. It'll probably last maybe 6 months, 12 months tops, and then eventually we'll build the product and technology for it. And fast forward 10 years later, believe it or not, we still do that to this day. Like we still have people placing phone calls. That never went away. And what ended up happening was, it turns out, we, instead of, the pace at which DoorDash was growing was just outstripping our ability to integrate with everyone. But instead of saying, okay, like we're just gonna slow down and just wait till we built everything out and scaled it out and integrated everything before we grew, we kind of just kept going. We wanted to see how far can you really push this idea of doing things that don't scale. And it turns out you can push it very far. And what ended up happening was we just figured out how to scale the human order placing system. Initially it was like 3 of us placing orders, and became 5, 10, 20. We built tools around it, and so that now 100 of us can all place orders. 200 of us can all place orders, and I think over time we built up this network of, I think at our peak we probably had 8,000 people every day, every night. All they did was just call in and place orders, and we had all the systems and tools built out to handle that, and that's has scaled even to this day. And we're public company. We're doing over 2 billion orders a year, and we still do that. We still have these people placing orders and over the phone. And it turns out, the takeaway from there was, it turns out doing things that don't scale is actually much more scalable than you think. Right? And I would argue, even to this day, a lot of the things we do at DoorDash are things that, quote unquote, are unscalable. and that that ethos never went away. Like it's not like all of a sudden you're a big company and you have to start doing scalable things. You just keep going. You just keep if the unscalable things are working, you just keep doing it, and it kind of forces instead of it kind of forces you to prioritize like what actually needs to be automated and what doesn't. And sometimes the unscalable solutions are actually more scalable, and that's really how we operate DoorDash even to this day. It's very much a culture of of experimentation. It's whenever we start new things, it's always in the beginning we kind of go through the same process where people hack together things. Maybe someone would either through our existing systems or through spreadsheets or whatever it might be, and then once you kind of validate it that this thing works, then you kind of start automating, right? And also what to automate, and the only way to know what to automate is because you've done it yourself manually, all right? And that's pretty much how DoorDash works even to this day. And it's you could think of DoorDash as just this one company, but underneath it's just 1,000 little companies or 1,000 little experiments, 5 or 10 person teams, all trying to, whenever they start new projects, they're all hacking things together, doing these unscalable things, and then we'll kind of repeat the process, right, with all these initiatives. The ones that we see traction, we'll give more funding, and we'll provide engineers and product support and automate. And the ones that don't work out, that's fine. We'll just have them move on to the next set of experiments. It's just a very low cost way of trying out many ideas at once instead of trying to build the perfect thing, trying to build the perfect scalable solution, launch it, and only to realize nobody wants it. So that's it. That's my story, and I'm happy to take questions. Yeah.
What's a recent experiment you ran, started small and then now have automated it? There's now like an exciting new feature, future feature.
Yeah, there's so many. I'm trying to think of it. I'm trying to think. There's some very recent ones, and then maybe I could give you 2 examples, right? I think the first is maybe a little older example. So it's our DashPass subscription product. So it's basically, the way you think about DashPass is basically it's like Amazon Prime. It's like you pay one. Yep. Oh, thank you for being a DashPass subscriber. But the original version of DashPass was actually was actually manual. So we had this idea of like a subscription program, but instead of like building everything out, what one of our someone on our team basically said, oh, well, let's try to validate this first. Let's run an experiment. So what they did was they sent out an email blast we kind of like picked a specific segment, specific geography. We found 1,000 customers that we think would be eligible or good kind of beta testers for DashPass. Emailed them and basically say, hey, we're launching this new program called DashPass, and would you want to be part of the beta trial? The way it works is you're gonna pay a flat fee every month, and in exchange you get free deliveries for that month. And we were able to send out different versions. Some people got the $10 per month version, other people got the $15 per month. And it took maybe literally just an afternoon, and then people started emailing back. And basically, email said, if you're interested, just respond to this email. And it was just like an email inbox we set up, and people started emailing back and said, hey, we're interested. I'm interested in the program. And we said, okay, no problem. What we did was we would just manually charge the credit card. We literally just went into Stripe, looked up their account, and the person just charged $10. And then we'll add them to this white list where they get free deliveries. And then we would just run that for a month and then just see, okay, what was their order and behavior, the retention rate, does the unit economics make sense? It was all manual, and zero engineers involved. And only once we validated, okay, like this thing works, this is the right price to charge it at. Like we need it, in order for one of these subscription programs to work. Like it's like kind of delicate. You can't just have. You got to find the right price and the right right kind of model where it's not just your power users using it. Because if only your power users are using it, then the economics don't work. Like you kind of have to find the right balance. But because he was doing all this manually, he can just run literally like 10 versions of DashPass at once. And then we figured out what the one that worked. We fine-tuned it over the next few months, and then we went and said, okay, let's put like 2 engineers on it and build it. So that was kind of and actually most of our projects or products, start out like that. Yeah.
I guess I have 2 questions. Feel free to answer either. The first one was when you were building this, was there any point where you were like, oh shit, I don't think this is gonna work? And then the second question is that you mentioned things that you mentioned this idea of do things that don't scale. But let's say you were tackling something that wasn't a consumer facing product where it might have been a little bit harder to let's say you were taking on an enterprise solution or something, which would have been a little bit harder to have create a solution that was more hacked together, more manual. Your thoughts on the idea of applying the same mindset or philosophy to that?
Yeah. I'll answer both questions. First question is, was there a point where I felt like this wasn't going to work? Yeah, literally every single day. It's like here's the thing I learned about the startup journey is it's only obvious looking back that, oh, this was going to succeed. It's never obvious in the moment, and it's not like a binary thing. It's not like, oh, you reach a point and say, okay, yeah, DoorDash succeeded, right? It's like every day it succeeded, and say, oh, it was so obvious. It was on those moment. It's like every day it feels like you're just firefighting. Things are going wrong constantly. Right? Deliveries are late. Right? I gave the example kind of the Stanford football game, but there's probably 100 of these that happened over the, if not thousands of these that happened over the course of the years, and different versions of it. So it never feels like this thing it always felt like this thing that the wheels were kind of falling off. But then if you it never feels like this thing is working in the moment. It's only when you sit down and kind of reflect. It's oh wow, we've come a long way. It's we've every single time one of these kind of Stanford football game instances happened, we made the product a little bit better, right? And then the next time something goes wrong, we made that a little bit better. And it's all very, very incremental improvements, and then over time it kind of compounds, right? And then you look back and it's oh wow, this is a completely different product. We've kind of built it out. So it doesn't. It's only you can only it's. I can only answer that question looking back, but never in the moment. So and your second question is does this idea of doing things that don't scale to enterprise customers?
Yeah, maybe
yeah.
a product which is a little harder to
No, I mean it's similar. Because I think in 2015, or 2 years in, we started transitioning, or started focusing on kind of the bigger restaurants. So before it was mostly mom and pop small businesses, and then we decided, okay, we also have to go after the big guys. You think of it as so for us that would be the national chains, McDonald's, Cheesecake Factory, Chipotle, etc. One of our first customers was Taco Bell, and it's kind of similar. It's in the beginning, I think what they wanted was, they were a little more sophisticated. They wanted analytics. They wanted to see on a store level what was was going on with like the DoorDash partnership, so then they can kind of figure out, okay, what percentage of my volume was delivery versus non, and they wanted to kind of like what the consumer behavior was. They wanted to do all that comparison, and then so when our head of biz devs was negotiating, they said, yeah, well, of course we have all that for you, it's part of our enterprise package. And then he came back and then when he came back and said, oh, we just signed up Taco Bell, but I may have accidentally promised them something we didn't have. And and I was like, what the hell? Why did you do that? But again, instead of like building that out, like building out that whole, like we didn't have a merchant dashboard or any of that. Today we have that. We have like a dashboard, analytics, all that. But we didn't have it. We didn't have, like there was literally no way. There's not even a place you can log in, right? For the it's like the way you sign for like a Square account, you can log in, right? But we didn't have any of that, so we just did it manually. So we basically someone went into, I think one of our what we were using back then. It was not Tableau, but like a Tableau competitor. And basically they would just manually generate these graphs, put into a PDF, and then just every week they would kind of just manually crunch numbers and then send it out to Taco Bell, as if, so then it kind of, from their perspective, it kind of looked like they were kind of getting what they wanted, and we kind of formatted it in a way where it looked like it was almost like a real dashboard, but not quite. And then again, it was through that process. Like we didn't even know what analytics we should be surfacing to them, but because you can just iterate much quicker when you're doing these things manually. And eventually, obviously we built everything out. We built point of sale integration, but none of that. Even with Taco Bell, we didn't have any of that in the beginning. We kind of figured it out down the road. They're in back. I'll be back.
No, super cool talk. One question I have is, since you mentioned that DoorDash is now a public company, as the chief product officer, how do you balance Wall Street's more quarterly, short-term expectations of what DoorDash is as a company versus the more long-term strategy that you're going with, your evolution, since that's something I've seen with a lot of companies, of that they're doing great private, then public just destroys them because their perception of, oh, we've always been working long-term, and kind of a mismatch of expectations. How do you kind of keep those two disparate ideas in there, since I think DoorDash is so far doing really well at it, and I want to know how. How's that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'll answer it a little bit differently. I think a common question people ask me is like, oh, now that you're public, does it feel any different? And to be honest, maybe the first day or the first few weeks is a little bit of a kind of adjustment, but after that, it kind of feels the same. It's not, a public company is not that much different than a private company, because at the end of the day, you're still trying to do the same thing, which is you're trying to build a great business, you're trying to build a great product that people want. I don't think the customer that's getting their Chipotle on time cares whether you're a public company or a private company. They just want their food on time. So it's at the end of the day, you still have to build a great product. And I think being public, it's really only two things that kind of changes. I think first is obviously now you have a liquid currency that you can use to, mostly paying employees, engineers, right? Instead of saying, oh, this is equity that's, one day will be worth something. Well, today it's it is worth something. It's part of your compensation, right? You can use that to acquire companies. We acquired a European company called Wolt a year and a half ago, and you can't do that if you're private, right? And I think the second thing is just really is more internal, managing. The stock is actually less about managing to what Wall Street is. It's more like managing your internal employees. Or your internal teams. It's now every day there's this number that people are gonna focus on, like when it goes down by 10%, they're like, oh, my compensation just went down by 10%, and vice versa, right? When it goes up like 10%, the same thing happens. And how do you get people to not get fixated on this number because there's just so much variance? Like just because DoorDash went up by 10%, it's not like the company got better by 10% that day, right? It's literally, it was the same company yesterday than today. Right? It's so how do you, and vice versa. So how do you, manage that? That is probably more challenging than like managing to Wall Street, because it's the same, like whether you're private or public, you still have to build a great company. Right? That's the way you manage to Wall Street, is you got to build a great company, you build a great product that people want. And that's true, when you're private, you have private investors, they're investors too. And, public investors think the same way. Here, this side of the room.
So I wanted to ask, what was your initial reaction when you first heard Uber getting Uber Eats? And then as a result of that, what were some of the initial things you were planning that change, or the strategic changes that you had inside?
Yeah. So Uber Eats kind of came up probably around 2015, 2016-ish. I think their thesis was really around, okay, I have this ride-sharing network, that's really popular, that's at scale. Why don't I just use the same driver, same network, instead of having them kind of, carry passengers, they can now carry packages. That was kind of thinking, and that's where they thought their advantage was. But it turns out the advantage you gain from that wasn't as much as they thought, right? Because it turns out I guess carrying people is very different than carrying packages. And I'll give you a couple examples. I think the first is when you're dealing with people, it's, if you think about it from the driver's point of view, it's a very different job. Like when you're doing Uber, you're sitting in your car all day. You're never getting out of your car, right? You're just and it's a very different experience. Like you're interacting with people. You got to talk to them. A lot of it is it tracks like a very different type of person versus like delivery. You're not dealing with people. You're getting in and out of the car all the time. You have to know how to find parking, know how to navigate, deal with the merchants, and et cetera. So it's a very different job, and it turns out like there's not the overlap between rideshare and delivery drivers is not as much as you think, and even Uber eventually found out about realized this too, right? Like the pool of Uber Eats drivers actually, and the pool of Uber passenger drivers is actually not that much, and so it's like the average Uber driver, for example, is a 40-year-old male, right? The average DoorDash driver is a 25-year-old female. It's like very different kind of profile, right? I think the other thing is that in Uber, speed is your number one competitive advantage. Like when you're doing ride sharing, like what is the thing you care about? Like when you order that car, it's like you want the car to show up as soon as possible. Right? If it says like I'm 15 minutes away, like you're gonna get pretty pissed, right? You're probably gonna switch to Lyft or something, and vice versa. Whichever one that can get you, whichever one has a closer car to you. Well, in delivery, it's very different. You're not necessarily ordering from the restaurant that can deliver the fastest, right? Because two things. Right? One is most of the time when it comes to delivery, most of that time is actually not the driving portion. It's the restaurant making the food. So even if you're, let's just take a 45-minute delivery. Let's call it 25 of that. Let's make the math simple. 40-minute delivery, 20-minute of that is the food, restaurant making the food, 20 minutes driving. So even if you're twice as fast, so the driving is only 10 minutes, the delivery time only goes from 40 to 30. right? Which is not as big of a, it's not like half the time. And the other point is that, you know, it matters what restaurants you have. Like you can have like, you know, 5-minute delivery, but the only thing you have is, you know, McDonald's, and that's it. Then, but then you really want, you know, Taco Bell, but you know, well then I'm gonna pick the 30-minute Taco Bell option. It's like I don't want McDonald's, so it doesn't matter if you're faster. And that's actually the original version of Uber Eats was actually they actually only had 2 options, and they would, you know, and the idea was like, okay, like I'll just have these food loaded in the driver's car, so then it's like 10-minute delivery. And that model didn't work out because people care a lot more about the selection, the content. Right? It's like you know, that matters a lot more. And then the last point about the Uber competitor thing is a lot of what ride sharing is actually in urban areas, right? Like think of like downtown San Francisco, you know, Manhattan, you know, things like that. Whereas delivery is like almost the opposite. Like most of the demand actually happens in the suburbs. It's like kind of a counterintuitive thing, right? Like DoorDash is actually about, you know, we're like 6 to 10 times bigger in the suburbs than in the city. Even just take the Bay Area as an example. Like the East Bay alone is like, I think like, you know, 6 or 8 times bigger than all the volume we do in San Francisco. The reverse is with Uber. So all your like your driver fleet advantage, you know, the you've built up in San Francisco doesn't apply when you're in, you know, Pleasanton or something, right? Or even Palo Alto. And that was kind of, so it wasn't like as, you know, it turns out like Uber just had to build everything from scratch anyways. So we wasn't so much we had to compete with Uber. The rideshare business, like they had to build a new business anyways, and we had to compete. We had to just compete based on just on a much more, it was a much more even playing field, so to speak. Yep.
Curious now what it was like at DoorDash in the beginning of the pandemic, and were there any stories of doing things that didn't scale?
Yeah, DoorDash in the pandemic. I mean, I think very similar. I remember when the pandemic hit, we're like, we're like, holy crap! Like, what are we gonna do about it? Like, there's just so much unknown. It's like that. I remember, we gathered like 30 to 50 of our top leaders all on a Zoom call and said, hey, like, we're gonna need like a daily kind of working team that just checked in. And to see what we can do to adapt. Right? Like we didn't know what was going to happen, like whether this was going to mean less people are going to order or more people are going to order. Like what was, it's like, do we have to like change like the delivery process? Like you have to give like masks and things like that to drivers. Like how do you do the handoff from the customer? Like, all these things, like very similar, like we kind of just quickly just iterated through all these things. Like okay, we have to do, well, we need to distribute PPE. Like let's have a team that to get that out. Well, we have to now do contactless delivery, right? So how do you, hack together something real quick, initially through SMS, right? And then, we didn't have any of that contactless delivery feature built, right? Like, I mean, over time, it's now built into the app. You can take a photo, but in the beginning, we didn't have any of that. So we had to can we hack it together just through text message or like the existing flow, right? Or like through education. There was a lot of things we kind of had to adapt on the fly, but it's kind of the same thing. Like you kind of, figure out what needs to get done. Initially, it's all manual, and then over time, you automate it. All right, you go.
So it's a 2-part question.
Okay.
Number one is that, what were the actual timelines on these experiments from like experiment to engineering? And then once you got to engineering integrated, how long did that actually take?
There's no timeline. It's not a time-based thing. It's a milestone-based thing, right? Like some experiments might take, a year and a half to work. Others you find product market fit in like a week, right? And then I remember there was a project that we tried to do, probably so we have this feature called Double Dash. So basically, it's this idea once you order, we'll ask you, hey, like, if you want to order from a second restaurant, or nearby, like we can just have the same dasher do it and batch it. So then it's like you're saving money on the delivery cost. Like we try to do that. So we launched that, like 2022? That probably began in 2016, right? It took us maybe like, I don't know how many iterations we went through to make that work. I mean, in the beginning, the first version did not work at all. I remember the first version was like, we tried to do it before the checkout. Like we would kind of have this 5-minute timer and said, hey, order from these 10 restaurants nearby the next 5 minutes. And then and that didn't really work. We didn't have enough like density of volume to pull it off as well at the time. It worked for like certain markets, but didn't work for other markets. That project probably has been revived like, killed and revived like 20 different times. And then finally we got to a version where it worked really well. We had the right density. Like we knew, like it took many iterations, and then only once we got that working, then we decided, okay, let's fund the team. And now there's a Double Dash team. Like it's not like that we didn't try to create a Double Dash team and then tell them, hey, figure it out. It's like that was only created once we saw signals that it was working.
What was the thing that made it work after all those times?
Kind of two things. I think one is, I think we didn't have the scale to pull it off. Like we underestimated the scale needed to pull off something like Double Dash. It's a lot more than you think, right? Like, we were just like, we were like much smaller back then. We were probably like, 50, 100 times smaller, and we just didn't have the volume to pull it off. I think the second thing is, I think it's much harder to pull that off pre-checkout. Like when we moved it to that kind of the post-checkout, that kind of made a lot more sense, and doing it not based, we had different versions where it's based on like what other people were ordering, and it turns out that wasn't as relevant when you're trying to batch your own. It turns out batching your own order made a lot more sense versus trying to like Double Dash someone else's order together and trying to time it. Like and it was just also like kind of the right cuisines, right? It's not like let's say you Double Dash like it doesn't really make sense to Double Dash McDonald's and Taco Bell at the same time, right? It's like I already have my fast food or my meal, my dinner. I want to Double Dash my dinner and ice cream, right? Or like dessert, like or alcohol, like from different places, or two very different places, right? It's like maybe one for I really like sushi, and then my other friend really likes Indian cuisine, like very different. Like then it makes sense to double dash. Yeah.
What are some metrics that you look for when launching new markets? Like, what do your own metrics see when you decide to partner with a company?
Yeah. A lot. I think. There's probably three things that matter at the end of the day, and they're all kind of related. I think the first is just in terms of what makes DoorDash successful. I think the first is selection. Like, do you have the restaurants you want on your platform? I think like that is what kicks off the flywheel. Like without the selection, like none of the rest matters, right? It's kind of like content streaming. Like if your show that you want to watch is not on Netflix, then you're gonna go to like HBO Max or whatever, like whatever the similar analogy is for DoorDash. So do you have all the selection you need? And then the second is like, can you deliver it at in a high quality manner, right? So like the items aren't missing, it's on time. And then the last thing is it at an affordable price? And the way it kind of translates is that is in terms of like financial metrics is like, okay, like if you can deliver all three, then are you getting like the top line? Are you getting the growth rate that you need? Are you getting does the unit economics make sense? And do you have the retention rate? Like, are people coming back? Right? If you're just getting a one-time pop in your growth rate, but then people aren't coming back, then it's like, then okay, like there's not really product market fit. I don't really have the restaurants I want. Like if you have the growth rate and the retention, but if you're just losing money on every order, well, that's no good either, because you're just gonna, because you're just gonna become more and more unprofitable as you get big, the bigger you get. So those are kind of like, these are like kind of like outputs, right? Like if you get the selection right, the quality right, and the price right, then it should translate into like, are you getting the growth you need? And the unit economics make sense for the business, and customers are coming back, right? And those are kind of essentially how we run the business. It's like you can think of DoorDash as just like a formula, and you're trying to find what that magic formula is. Yep.
So usually if I order from a food delivery app, it's like a total crapshoot, whether I choose DoorDash or Uber Eats or Postmates. Do you like see that all of these are like the similar apps as distinctly different products? Or like how would you differentiate DoorDash if you didn't?
Yeah, I mean it goes back to those three things, right? Like do you have the selection I want? It's the same as like comparing between it's like compare it between different streaming services. Like it's like Netflix and Hulu aren't that different, but if the show I want to watch is on Netflix, then I'm gonna go Netflix. So the strategy has always been like, well, first and foremost, like, do you have the selection? And our strategy from day one is always, we're gonna get the most selection possible on our platform, and try to and essentially lock those restaurants in to work with us versus a competitor, right? And that's through, and there's many ways of doing that, right? That's through, you can have like exclusive contracts, you can do it, but mostly through kind of operations lock-in. Like we're just gonna be an easier partner to work with. We have more products that the restaurants can use. We have better integration, and that's kind of the starting point, right? And then you kind of layer on top of, okay, we're also gonna build we're also gonna be slightly better than our competitors at logistics. Like we're just gonna be slightly faster, slightly more accurate, and we're gonna beat you on price as well. And through, because we have because through our scale and through things like DashPass, right? It's not like one thing, right? But I think it's kind of like a flywheel. You start with the selection, you got to deliver at great quality, and you're going to be cheaper than your competitors. And it's just like hundreds and thousands of little things within that, that compound over time to out execute. All right, the red Stanford hoodie.
At what point did you start out the long-term vision?
Yeah, like, you want to expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, some people, I guess, like some founders will say they from the start knew that they would turn into X, Y, or Z. And
Yeah. I could tell you, like we always knew DoorDash we wanted to build more than just a food delivery company. We picked the name DoorDash, not Food Dash, because we knew the idea was once you get it to work with restaurants, then you can make it work with everything. So in that sense, like that long-term vision, like yes, like we always knew that was like the general direction we wanted to go. But in terms of how we got there, like we had no idea. And anybody who tells you, oh, we figured it out from day one, it's probably not true. Right? Like we had no idea what we were doing. Right? Like we were literally just, we couldn't even. We were literally just focused on like what we had to get done the next day. Like let alone like, we couldn't even think like a week out, let alone like a month out, a year out, or 5 years out, 10 years out. Right? In the beginning, it's kind of just have to focus on the task at hand. Like there's just so much stuff going wrong, and you like the only thing you cared about was did John's pizza delivery tomorrow is going to get delivered on time. Like that was like that's the terms of like how much vision we could think we were afforded like in the early days, so to speak, right? And over time, as you kind of get, things kind of get built out, as you kind of get more scale, then you can start thinking, okay, now we're in like 5 cities or 10 cities. We have scale. Like what else can we, do besides worrying about, whether John's, Chipotle order gets delivered on time. Now I can start thinking about, okay, like what other cities can I go into, right? It's not just a Palo Alto thing. I want to make this work in New York and LA and Chicago. And then once you get to like 50, 100 cities, now it's like, okay, now we're at scale in like 100 different cities. Like, we can start thinking about maybe instead of just John's Chipotle order, I can also deliver his Chipotle and his alcohol order at the same time, right? All right, now that I've got your alcohol and lunch, dinner taken care of, what about like your groceries? We can take care of groceries, or we can take care of your convenience goods, maybe also pharma, and then your medical prescriptions, maybe your pet supplies, right? Like these things kind of come naturally as the bigger, as you get more and more mature, as you start scaling out more and more, then you're afforded the mind space and permission, right? Like I guess permission quotations to think longer term, because you can afford to do it now. So it's kind of, it's like it kind of, it's like you almost have to like earn it, right? It's like you kind of have to survive the short term to get to the long term. It's something that Tony used to tell me all the time, right? It's like your ambition grows over time as the business grows. It's never like, oh, from day one I knew I was gonna dominate the world, right? It's like it's like you can't when I was in your shoes 10 years ago, like all I can think of like was like Palo Alto delivery, not that's it, like just Palo Alto. Like now I could think of like now I could think about like, oh, and like, well, a couple more countries. Now I could think about international expansion, right? But I wasn't thinking about how to win Europe when I was like 10 years ago.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
All right, a lot of questions. Here, over there in the back.
In that vein, how did you scale yourself from thinking about problems that are on a municipal scale? Like, how did you scale yourself to being effective at running this organization globally?
Yeah, I'll answer that in 2 ways. I think the first is you never kind of want to lose touch of that. Like even to this day, I mean, one of the things we try to teach people is this idea of getting down to the lowest level of details, right? Just because you're now operating at a larger scale, it doesn't mean all of a sudden, okay, now it can be like high level and I can be abstract and, no, like, again, like it's the customer who's, McDonald's order is late by an hour, doesn't give a crap that you have 2 billion orders and you're operating at scale, right? It's like you still have to get the details right. Like this is like a details-driven business, right? Like maybe different for other industries, but at least for logistics, right? This is not pure software where, every single delivery is different, right? Like every single delivery, there's so many variables that can go wrong. Every single delivery where every single delivery where it's like you have to like earn it, right? Because guess what? When the clock hits 12 a.m., your counter resets back to 0. We have to earn all, 2 billion deliveries every year, or I guess our daily, whatever that's divided by 365 is, I think it's like 5 or 6 million. You have to earn all of that back every single day, right? So it's a very, that's the kind of the difference between like an operations business like ours versus maybe like, like a SaaS business where it's just like you're locked into this recurring, or like a recurring model. So yeah, it's like even to this day, like we, in our business or product reviews, like we would look at things on a, typically on a zip code level, if not even on a, like we would like literally like pull up specific delivery ID, like 2546, like pull it up. Hey, like what went wrong here? Right? Like that still happens even to this day. You can't lose touch of that. And I hope it's like there's no rule saying, okay, now that you're a quote unquote big company, now you have to do like, now I have to like act like a big company or do like scalable things now. I mean, oftentimes that's what kills companies is they try to act like a bigger company than they should. Like the whole point is you're not trying to be a big company. You're trying to preserve all the advantages of a startup, the advantages of doing unscalable things. So just try to do that as long as you physically can until you cannot anymore, right? So that's kind of part one. And part two, maybe this is what you were also asking me, is more like how do I scale like the organization, like in terms of like, or maybe scale myself in terms of like, in the beginning you're just dealing with 10 people, and today, you're dealing with like thousands of people. Like, yeah, like the way you do things when you're a 10 person, when you have to communicate to 10 people is very different, right? It's when you're initially 10 people, you don't, this idea of like culture is not a thing, or in the sense that culture happens kind of automatically through osmosis because everyone's in the same room. So you can just shout across the table and like, things get done. But, so it's very easy to get people on the same page. But when you're 1,000 people or 10,000 people, well, you can't distribute it worldwide. Well, you can't do that anymore. Like, how is the person in New York still going to think the same way as you are, and as well as the person that's in Germany, right? Like, and get everyone on the same page. That becomes a lot harder. I define culture as, will these people make the same decisions as you would have, as if you were in the room, right? Or maybe, or you take it one step further, they'll make better decisions than you would have. And every single day, there's probably hundreds and thousands, or if not thousands of meetings that happen at DoorDash that I'm not in every single one of these meetings. I'm probably in like a tiny, tiny fraction of those, right? Yet all these people need to be making aligned decisions. That's really hard, and there's not really one answer for that, right? It's a lot of it is through, communication. A lot of it is through reinforcement. It's through setting the right goals. It's writing down your cultural values, and reinforcing it through kind of stories, and rewarding the right incentives. It's honestly, that's still something I struggle to this day. Like I don't think I've figured that out, right? And by the time I figure it out, like it's not relevant anymore, because by then DoorDash will be at like, by the time you figure it out for 1,000 people, then DoorDash will be like 5,000 people, right? And then now you have to like do a whole, new set of things, right? So that's kind of the thing with that's kind of the funny thing with scaling as well. All right, last question. Corey, you pick one. Too much pressure.
I was gonna take it for myself, but Aaron.
Have you ever found situations where doing things that don't scale is actually not the right thing to do? And like an example that I could think of is if you're building a financial service where you're like holding customer funds, you obviously want to you can't hack that together. You got to make it really secure, etc. So do you have examples where doing things that don't scale is actually not what you should be doing?
I think a lot of these things are always easy to say in hindsight. Yeah, of course, like we should have done this thing that's more scalable. Like the system broke, right? Like I mean, like a great example is, I guess our site reliability and like the how do I describe it? Like the code base, like it was probably one of the most hacked together thing like ever, right? It's like it was just like like we didn't no one was worried about like, oh, does this thing in it, is this code base gonna scale? It's just like a lot of like spaghetti code and the site would literally go down. Like I remember like there was a period where every Friday, guaranteed 5 p.m. hits, the site will go down, and we would have to run all these scripts to kind of keep it alive. And it kind of went on for, and by the time we fixed it for like one stage of the growth, like, patched it up, like then like DoorDash would have been like three times bigger. And then now we're dealing with different set of issues. And it's always easy to say in hindsight, yeah, like we probably could have built out our systems in a more scalable way. Like we focused more on like building like better testing frameworks and using like microservices instead of like a monolith, and like it's all that's easy to say in hindsight, but would we have gone to where we are today if we didn't take the unscalable approach? I don't know. Like there are companies, I can name a bunch of companies in our space or adjacent space that have much better infrastructure than us, and testing tools and technical reliability and things like that, but it didn't really matter in the end, right? Because if you spend all this energy building this, but the business didn't get to where you need to get to, like, does it matter, right? It's like, and so it's kind of like, yeah, it's easy to say these things. Like I don't know, like maybe like we could have scaled out our systems and grew the business at the same time and even more. But you've also seen examples where they built everything out perfectly, and then it turns out it didn't matter because the business never got there, right? So it's really hard to answer these things, beforehand, right? It's only easy to answer these things after the fact that there was a site outage or a security breach or an accounting issue, right? So I don't know if that's a good answer because partly because I don't know what the answer is.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
Last question. And kind of it's two-part. Part one, any closing advice for people who are just like starting out on their startup journey and just starting a company? Second part of the question is how often do you use DoorDash?
I probably use DoorDash almost every day. I'm definitely a power user. And yeah, I mean, back to your first question. Yeah, my number one advice is especially like among this audience where it's like college students, is it kind of goes back to kind of my story, right? Is don't try to start DoorDash, try to start Palo Alto Delivery. right? Like, don't try to think of like, don't try to like just start a company for the sake of starting a company. Right? Instead, if you think of it as like, oh, this is just an experiment, this is just a project, you would actually go a lot farther for a couple reasons. I think first is, I think as soon as you start thinking about, oh, I want to start a company, like you end up focusing on the wrong things, right? You end up focusing on things that don't really matter. Like, well, what do you think of when someone says I'm starting a company? Well, you think about, well, I gotta incorporate, right? I gotta get office space, I gotta write a business plan, I gotta talk to investors, and like a bunch of stuff that honestly don't matter at all when you're starting out, right? The most important thing when you're starting out is building something people want, validating that, and then finding product market fit. Like that's it. It's not all the other stuff. It's not like raising money or anything. Like you don't want to be in a point where you're like 2 years down the road and it turns out like you were just working on something that was like a waste of time because no one wanted this product. And I've seen so many people, including my friends and my peers, like where they just kind of waste like the prime years of their lives just working on something that doesn't end up going anywhere because it turns out they were working on the wrong thing, right? Including people that have raised funding, right? And it's like, you don't want to find that answer how 3 years into your journey and you've burned through like boatloads of money. All right, you want to know that from the very beginning. And when you think of it more as like a class project, like all of a sudden that pressure is lifted off your shoulders. It's like, oh, it's not like you're trying to start a company. I'm just trying to see if people want food delivery in Palo Alto. That's it. Not nothing else. And if it fails, no big deal. It's just a class project. It's just like any other project that you work on. Right? There's like the quarter ends and it's like, yeah, you move on to something else. It's like not a big deal. And kind of the rate at which you can experiment is just a lot more. Like the pressures and the stigmatism that comes with that is a lot lower. And I just think it's a much healthier mindset because then you end up focusing on the right thing, which is all you're focusing on is you're building something that people want. And then once you crack that, then turn it into a company. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Everyone, welcome to stick around, meet everyone. And thanks, Stanley.
Yeah, thanks for